There's already a Snoopgate face-off which is going on in the parliament now. There's a reported and a big one U-turn by the Amnesty International Group. This is, remember, a civil rights body that has now said that it never claimed that an NSO Pegasus list of people who were spied upon. It claims that the list is only indicative and contains names of people who clients of NSO would like to spy on and not exactly the real names that were spied upon. Amnesty instead is blaming global media companies for this confusion. Amnesty is one of the proponents of the so-called global investigation as well, which is now said to have revealed a list of high-profile individuals who were allegedly snared upon through their phones through Israeli Pegasus spyware. What has happened therefore politically? The Bharatiya Janata Party has been quick to claim vindication, stating no one knows where did the snooping list come from. No one even knows where the phones were really hacked in fact. Meanwhile, IT panel chairperson Shashi Tharoor has now said that their committee has enough power and that there is no need for a JPC probe as is being asked by other opposition netas. IT Minister Ashwini Vaishnav will likely address the Parliament at 2 p.m. to give the government stand. A PIL has already been filed in the Supreme Court seeking a court-monitored investigation. And remember, it is the Israeli tech firm in the eye of the snooping storm, and that has also now come forth and has spoken to India today. Now I'm joined by Kim Zetter. She is an American investigative journalist and she has been tracking these different statements that have also come in on this issue. Kim, first to you, precisely because this has become such a global issue and the Amnesty now saying that the list never intended to be in real. It was only indicative. What do you say to this?
I think that people are misinterpreting Amnesty's statement. The bottom line is that there is evidence that at least 37 phones on that list were indeed targeted or spied on using the Pegasus software. What Amnesty is saying is that there is a list of 50,000 phone numbers from which those 37 numbers were taken. 50,000 phone numbers, they don't know if all of those people were spied on. They were only able to obtain 67 phones. It's a lot of work to track down the owners of these phones to get permission from them in order to do a forensic examination of the phones and then to determine if the Pegasus software is on them. So they were only able to obtain 67 phones that were on the list. And of those 67, 37 showed evidence of having been targeted with the Pegasus spyware. So the list is not a hoax. It's not a bluff. The list raises legitimate questions about who is being spied on with the software. The only question is, though, is whether all 50,000 people on that list were indeed spied on with Pegasus software.
So where do you think, Kim, this confusion has come from? Because even the Amnesty was not very clear earlier to say that it was simply indicative. The Amnesty group was, in fact, very forthright with the list that had come out. And therefore, a lot of readers, people who were caught off guard, were suddenly taken aback because there were some high-profile, influential names mentioned in that list.
Yes, I think that they've done a horrible job at being clear about all this. There were 17 media partners around the world who wrote stories about this. Some of those media partners were very careful to say that they don't really know what the list is, but that the evidence shows that at least 37 phones on that list were spied on with the Pegasus software. So some of them have been very careful to say that. Other media outlets have not been careful, and they've simply reported that this is an NSO spy list. And so Amnesty is saying that they themselves never actually asserted that this entire list are people who were targeted with the Pegasus software. But what they are saying, and they still stand by this, is that at least 37 phones that they examined were people who were spied on using the Pegasus software. So I hope that brings some clarity a little.
Can we say, Kim, then that there were these global publications or world media, so to say, that could have either misrepresented, misinterpreted, or could have just got carried away without further trying to understand the situation?
Yeah, I think that it's unfortunate that they weren't all on the same page about how they describe this list. The bottom line is, though, that the list does raise legitimate questions about
Yes.
how the NSO software is used. And NSO is trying to wiggle out of those questions by pointing to the list and saying the list isn't legitimate. But there are people on that list who were indeed spied on using the Pegasus software. And some of those were journalists, and some of those were human rights activists. And this software is only supposed to be used in order to track terrorists or criminals. And so it's clear that it is being misused by some customers in order to spy on dissidents and journalists and politicians and potentially others.
Can we also say, Kim, then, that at this point, the names that surfaced in these lists, all of them were not necessarily snooped upon? There could have been few. It is definitely a list that is worth consideration. There are serious allegations around the spyware. But to assume that all those names were snooped upon would not be a fair conjecture at this point.
Right. We don't know if all of them were.
Yes.
I mean, it merits different journalists looking at those numbers and trying to match who the people are that own those numbers, and trying to do some forensic investigation on those phones to see. But Amnesty they don't have the time, they didn't have the resources to look at 50,000 phones. So what they did was they looked at a sampling of the phones. And from a sampling of those phones, they did find some that had the Pegasus software on.
And Kim, I would like
just
ask you a continued question to that, because you did maintain that while most of them may not have been snooped upon, some of these numbers were. How are you reaching to that conclusion that some of the names asked and mentioned in that list were indeed snooped upon by the Israeli spyware?
So the stories and the report that Amnesty put out a technical report, and they do describe the 37 phones. And some of the news stories, the Washington Post and the Guardian, they wrote stories about who some of those phones belonged to. And so some of those phones belonged, for instance, to the fiance and the wife of Jamal Khashoggi, who was the Saudi journalist who was murdered by Saudi Arabia. So there are phones that have been identified by the journalists, by Amnesty International, and that's why I'm saying that there were phones that were spied on.
What is the lesson, Kim, do you think that needs to be taken here on? Because it's become a big showdown here in India. There are opposition parties gunning for debates and discussions in the parliament. They are directly attacking the government, stating it is the government that has done it. But with now different variations come in, and that even Amnesty saying it was indicative, what do you think is the lesson that one must take before this has become such a global storm?
I think the lesson here is to look more closely at this spyware, at Pegasus, who it's being sold to and how it's being used for them. The list of 50,000 is sort of a distraction because everyone is focusing on that now. But the bottom line is that there are legitimate questions raised about this software. Who is purchasing it and how are they using it? And in India, that question obviously is very foremost in the minds of a lot of people. A lot of questions remain to be asked in India. Did the government purchase this software? If it did purchase this software, how did it use it? So there is a call for transparency here with the Indian government.
Kim Zetter, American investigative journalist, thank you so much for speaking to India Today with your views.
You're welcome.
Now remember, there is a massive twist that has come in the Snoopgate scandal. Of course, there are serious allegations. A list had emerged with allegedly a lot of names, high profile, that were snooped upon. But what are these twists that have now emerged? I'm going to explain it to you one by one. Let's take a look. Now, the opposition parties are clearly attacking the government directly, stating that based on a snooping list, it is the government here in the country that had every reason to snoop on these high-profile names. Amnesty, which is a civil rights body of international proportions, at the forefront of the Snoopgate charge, had come out to allege that the list was now in public domain. However, then Amnesty decided to deny any real list, saying it is indicative. Indicative means that it expects the NSO clients to want to snoop, likely to snoop on these names, not necessarily that it has been snooping already. Amnesty in many ways making a U-turn there. Amid heat in the parliament, which has now become a huge storm, parliament is being continuously disrupted. Sessions are now being adjourned. The government is claiming that there was no snooping, only a fishing expedition, alleging and trying to downplay any criticism of the government via the opposition parties. So these are some of the twists and turns that have come, which was now just a few days ago a global storm. And of course, now because all the global storm has now reached the Indian Parliament, Kamaljeet Sandhu, my colleague, is outside the Parliament as well. Kamaljeet, because while the Amnesty now says not necessarily that all of these names were spied upon, this was indicative, the fact is in the opposition in the Parliament is ensuring that the government is cornered. If you can hear me, Kamaljeet, what precisely is the status there of the proceedings in Rajya Sabha at the Lok Sabha? All right, I believe Kamaljeet cannot hear me just right away. We'll try and fix that communication link. Kamaljeet, if you can hear me, what is the status of the proceedings there at the Parliament? All right, so we'll just try and fix that connection. Remember, Israeli tech firm is in the eye of the snooping storm, has also spoken to India Today TV, claiming that the list of countries in that list was not accurate, even calling it a fabricated information. Listen into this.
What could be the deal between Israel's NSO and India? And what could be the method of procurement?
Actually, I can't refer to any of our customers. I just want to emphasize that NSO is not related to the list published by Forbidden Stories. It is not an NSO list, and it never was. Just to say it's fabricating information. It is not a list of targets or potential targets of NSO customers.
Do you think that it was some government agreement between India and Israel for India procuring the software for NSO?
Again, I can't refer to NSO's customers.
When the government of India denies the accusation of snooping on its people, what could be the base and substantial evidence to back the charges leveled in this series of investigations against the government?
So you have to ask the government. I can only speak on behalf of NSO, of course, not on behalf of any other country.
The NSO Group, residing in the building behind me, found itself this week in the middle of a political turmoil as a piece of investigative journalism leveled accusations against the company that its spyware named Pegasus is being used by its customers and governments for unlawful surveillance against human rights activists, journalists, and political leaders. Among the data trove released, there were found hundreds of Indian phone numbers, among them phone numbers of a few dozen journalists, government critics, and even political leaders such as Rahul Gandhi. The company, I should state, is denying the accusations and denying any knowledge of the unlawful use done by its product by its customers.
And our colleagues have been reporting the proceedings of the Parliament. Kamaljeet Sandhu is now reporting from outside the Parliament to give us all the updates. Kamaljeet, if you can hear me, what is the status with the proceedings? Because it appears that the Snoopgate scandal has clearly covered all other issues and the opposition all guns blazing.
Well, the opposition has its hands full with a variety of issues on a platter, the farmer agitation being one, with farmers moving there. But yes, the Pegasus row on which the story is, that is one of the key issues. Now, Amnesty International has come out. This is not a Pegasus spyware list. This is the client's interest list which has come out. So to say that there is no particular names. However, several journalists and activists have come out and said the experts have identified that their phones have been hacked. How is the Congress planning to take this forward? Because the government has, in that particular sense, denied any sort of role.
So who was snooping then? If the phone hacking was not done on behest of Indian government, was it being done on behest of Zimbabwe government? Who is interested in listening to the conversations of the Indian opposition party leaders, the Indian media, the Indian judiciary? Is it the Japanese Prime Minister? So the government must come out clean, and it is really unfortunate. As there are so many other issues that we are facing today, including the farmer agitation. The government of the day has all the time to listen to the phone tapping conversations of its opponents, but has no time in parliament to listen to the farmer issues. They're not even allowing us. Or some of the other issues like unemployment, the inflation. It's really unfortunate.
But the government is alleging that, this entire thing has been caused, one, to defame the government. The opposition is playing a big role. Disruptors and obstructors is the word which is being used by Amit Shah for the opposition.
No, they should allow our notice. Bajwaji and I, we have given a notice on discussing the farmer issues and the farmer demands. The government must allow a discussion. Once the government allows the discussion, parliament will function. The government is disrupting our notice. Government
is disrupting the notice. Pratap Singh Bajwa is with us. So you raising the farmer agitation issue 8 months on, the issue is still on. Now there is also the Pegasus row. How are you taking it forward? It doesn't seem that the government is too moved by any of the issues being raised by the government.
They would be very, very soon moved. Once they find like their cadres are not being allowed to move out of their houses in Punjab and Haryana, when they would be not allowed to move out of their houses throughout the country, they will very soon realize.
One final question. Do tell us, are you okay using your phone, or do you suspect that somebody is listening to it?
Okay. See, I'm not worried they may use. We know for long that it's being tracked.
So
we know
for very long it's been tracked, and this is an issue that the Congress-led opposition is trying to harp on, and clearly the government is no mood to relent, and neither is the opposition.
Dipender Hooda, Pratap Singh Bajwa, the Congress party is clearly all guns blazing both on the Pegasus snooping scandal and the farmers' issues as well. Now remember, the protesting farmers issue is also very important, creating fireworks in the parliament. What's happening on the ground?